If you've spent years struggling with things that you call procrastination and avoidance and self-sabotage, even when you know what you should be doing and you want to do it, that's not a failure of discipline. It's a systems problem, but not the kind that you've always been told to fix by self-improvement culture. Most productivity advice is built for people whose systems are already online. They've never been broken in the first place, who already feel safe in their own body, who already know how to access motivation, who can tell the difference between tiredness and fear. That's what the baseline should be when you're not weighed down by things like neurodivergence or trauma or abuse. But we don't have that baseline. So we have a lot of challenges, a lot of mountains that we need to climb to get to the same place a lot of people are on default. But that's okay, because there are ways to beat these challenges and we will be better off for it. We will be stronger for it. If your nervous system is constantly on high alert, feeling like you're doing something wrong, if you oscillate between shutdown and overdrive, between complete burnout and hyperfixation, if you collapse under invisible pressure and then overcompensate to prove that you're not broken, to prove that you're not lazy, then you don't need another planner. You need a new approach to performance itself, a new understanding of what productivity should be and mean to you, because clearly the definition you're working off of isn't working. And that's not a fatal flaw. It just means that things have to be recalibrated. And that recalibration is what the Northstar Flywheel is, which is what this video is all about. The path, the process, the complete system for transforming your relationship to effort from the inside out. This isn't about hacks. This is about healing the architecture that effort relies on. Architecture that for most people has always been in place, but for you has been broken down along the way. This method, the one that I built painstakingly from my own rock bottom, is solidified in one powerful truth. You don't need to force yourself into action. In fact, willpower, even though it only exists in short bursts and usually does more harm to us than good. What you need instead is to restore access to that action. And to do that, you need to move through 4 different stages again and again, each one supporting the next. First is prime, where we root into safety so your nervous system can actually engage, reaffirming that you're safe now, and the threats that led to that architecture getting beaten down don't exist anymore. Next is drive, tapping into true neuroscience-backed intrinsic motivation that's rooted in integrity and values. Next is clarity, where we diagnose what the resistance is and where it's coming from so you can intervene in real time. And fourth is confidence, building identity-based systems that you can always return to no matter what season of life you're in. Each part is essential. Each part solves a piece of the puzzle that willpower alone can never solve. Together they form a flywheel, a self-sustaining cycle that makes effort feel effortless, natural, not forced. Because it's not supposed to be like this. So let's get started. Let's begin with a truth that most people always overlook. You can't force your body into focus if your brain still thinks you're in danger. It goes both ways. You can't force your brain into focus if your body still thinks you're in danger. And that's not just some poetic metaphor, it's actual neuroscience. It's the invisible gatekeeper behind your executive dysfunction, your chronic avoidance, your collapsing under pressure, the constant repeating cycle that never changes, which is why the most important system in this flywheel begins not with action and forward motion, although I know how badly you crave it, but instead it starts with safety. Prime is about regulating your state of being before demanding performance. Because if your nervous system is in a protective state, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, then your executive functioning isn't accessible because it's not the priority. Survival is. Your brain literally deprioritizes your abilities to plan, prioritize, initiate, and persist. That's why it's called prime. It primes the system. It lays the foundation, and without it, every other strategy, whether it's from this flywheel or from some other YouTube video, is always going to act like a band-aid. And band-aids work for a short amount of time every time you go through this cycle. But if you're like me, and you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you're ready to go deeper. And when you do, your energy stabilizes. Your attention is available and not something that you have to fight for. Your resistance softens. Your system becomes teachable, sustainable, and resilient, like the person we both know you are. So let's look at how this works in real life. Think of how most productivity advice starts. You make a list, you use a timer, you pair it with something you like, you break it into smaller steps, and the notorious just count down from 3 and just do it. And sometimes, again, it works, because Band-Aids do work for a short time, and you've probably tried those things at different points in your life. And you probably know what you're supposed to be doing, all of those things swarming around your brain, those never-ending, uncompleted tasks. But every time you try to force yourself, you end up spiraling in the same cycle of shame. And the only question on your mind is, what is wrong with me? Let me reframe that for you really quickly. Not to take away the accountability, but rather to give you a neutral playing field from which to take accountability and grow. There is nothing wrong with you. You're not just failing to act, you're protecting yourself from something that feels unsafe. If you keep trying to fix this from the mindset of there's something wrong with me, you're never going to find a sustainable solution because it's all rooted in shame. But if you can identify what's actually going on, if you realize that there is something that you're protecting yourself from, well, then the answer becomes, okay, how do I make this thing feel safer? Or how do I remove the danger? Not to mention that the world we live in now punishes slowness and rewards pushing through. It makes sense that your system learned to brace and collapse and to disappear. Prime changes that. It builds the internal conditions, okay, these are things that you control, where effort becomes safe, aligned, authentic, and not only safe, but rewarding, not just a chore. The first practice we're going to look into is anchoring in predictability. Many of the people who struggle with this are unconsciously addicted to chaos. And you aren't the only one, so don't just focus on feeling attacked. Again, all of this is data, neutral data to analyze your situation, to know how to move forward. And it's not like you or I, when we are addicted to chaos, want to be, but oftentimes unpredictability is the marker for safety when we were growing up. As a result, stability feels unfamiliar or even threatening. I've actually heard that a lot when it comes to relationship advice, is that when you struggle with stable relationships and you tend to sabotage a good thing, it's because you're not used to the stability. You like chaotic relationships. You're used to people who mistreat you. It's the same thing here. That's why this is one of the most underrated prime practices. It's not about rigid routines or forcing a schedule as much as you think that's what you need right now. And again, I have been there. I thought what I needed to change was to be able to actually stick to an extensive to-do list and an extensive schedule. Now, completely on the flip side of it, all of the things I want are getting done. All of my priorities are being fulfilled. All of my values are being lived out through my actions. But I don't have to stick to a rigid routine or a rigid system. I still have routine, probably more than most people, but my worth isn't defined in it the way I thought it should be. The goal is to build repeatable, tiny touch points that your body will begin to recognize as signs of safety throughout this growth process. So an example of that anchoring into predictability would be lighting a candle every time you start a task. So I always, or try to always, have a candle going when I'm filming. Kind of just gets me into that mindset of I'm sitting down to, well, film. Or listening to the same playlist or a playlist during focused work. I like to listen to soundtracks from some of my favorite movies. Not too distracting, usually nothing with words, but something to help relax me. Or beginning your day with one predictable activity that grounds you. I almost always journal, and once I get going, I really have to struggle to stop because I love talking and getting my thoughts out there and processing all of my emotions and my feelings. And when I don't, I really feel the difference. But again, I just want to pause and say these are not markers to judge yourself by. If you don't journal every day, I'm not saying that you're failing or you're doing something wrong. And you might feel that way because you're used to tying to your worth to the things that you do whether they're productive or not, because you may not associate productivity with making yourself a cup of tea or going for a walk. But if you've made it so that your wellness routine is, oh, I make a cup of tea every day and I go for a walk every single day, well then on the days that you miss those things, you still associate it with failure. These are not just another stick to beat yourself with. Journaling is something that I use to anchor myself into my routine and into my growth. But how I approached it, say, a couple years ago was, well, I have to journal because I said I was going to journal and I know it makes me feel better and that's how I know that I'm doing a good job. But if I don't journal, then I'm doing something wrong and I'm failing, etc. But now it's just, I like to journal. And maybe that transformation seems impossible right now, but I'm living proof if it helps, and that's why I'm here with you today. But getting back on track, all of those cues act as neural anchors. They gently train your nervous system to expect ease instead of chaos. And again, it's so key when you do this not to tie the completion to success or to your worth. It's just a cue. And over time, these anchors become like a soft landing place, a way to re-enter a productive state, or not even productivity, but just a state of action, a state of doing, a state of not just sitting there and blaming yourself. It helps you do all that with less friction the next time. Second is shifting that inner critic to the inner witness. One of the most damaging habits in this shutdown is that self-judgment. And it's one of the predetermining factors I use when deciding if someone should be my client or not. Is that shame spiral there? Is that constant self-criticism there ruling your life? Because if it's not, you're never really going to understand the pain of what the people I do work with go through. Because not only are you struggling with not getting things done, but every single time you feed into that cycle, because again, it's so ingrained in you, it becomes another piece of evidence of why you're a failure. And that leads into all the root causes of why you're like this in the first place, that fear of failure, but also fear of success. All those comments of, why am I like this? Why can't I just do what other people do so easily? Other people do it without problems, so I must be broken. I shouldn't need help just to clean my damn kitchen. I shouldn't have to plan my meal prepping so extensively before even starting the meal prepping. Why can't I just do the thing I want to do? Now, this inner critic masquerades as motivation, but all it does is reinforce a state of unsafety. You're failing, you're unworthy, you don't get to rest until you do this right. And then you usually end up resting anyway because you're so mentally and physically exhausted from the cycle, and it gets even worse. So the practice here is to replace that inner critic with the inner witness. A witness doesn't judge, it notices, it narrates, it holds space. So if you catch yourself doom scrolling, well, the average response is going to be to, I can't believe I'm doing this again. I'm going to keep doing it because I already feel bad about myself and blah, 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 blah. The witness can say, I noticed that I'm avoiding something. I didn't realize that I got into this spiral. What is feeling unsafe right now? Do I actually need to just turn my brain off and just zone out for a minute, or am I actively avoiding something? How long have I been doing this? Why am I doing this? What started it? What started for me to reach for my phone instead of doing something else? It sounds really simple, but this simple act kind of interrupts that cycle and interrupts the shame loop and creates that foundation for healing. Not from a place of fake positivity, but neutrality, taking out that negativity. The witness isn't passive. It's what makes you teachable. It's what makes integration possible. And lastly, in Prime, is to create moments of completion. Most people who struggle with this have task debt. Hundreds of little open loops floating around in their world. Unsent emails, half-clean spaces, conversations left hanging. And this creates a chronic sense of never being done and never really starting. And that's overwhelming enough to shut you down before you make progress the next time. That's why the goal here is to emphasize micro closure, the practice of creating emotional and physical completion, communicating with yourself instead of just blowing by and continuing on as normal. Not finish everything, but move one item fully from start to finish. Or decide what the micro action is in the bigger task and only do that. I call those minimum viable actions. Like instead of unloading the whole dishwasher, decide that you're going to do one row of dishes or even one dish, close it back up, and make peace with the fact that you are done with what you said you were going to do. You're building trust with yourself that way. Instead of, oh, I need to unload the dishwasher, I can't even begin to start because I'm so overwhelmed. And again, normal people won't get that. Normal people will call that lazy. I know you're not, but seriously, try it. And that completion, however small, quiets your brain. It releases some of that cognitive load. It tells your system you're safe to move forward. This builds momentum from a place of peace, not urgency. If you're tired of trying to force yourself into action, if you're ready to feel safe enough to move forward without that constant shame or burnout, then this is the work that I do professionally. This is the path I took myself on when I was at my own rock bottom and I couldn't live like that anymore. I knew I had so much potential. There were so many things I wanted to do, but I just couldn't. I offer free discovery calls that gently unearth your patterns and see what's going on with you, and we start building a path forward with you to see if the work that I do is even what you need, and if not, what you need instead. Click the link below to book. You don't have to do this alone anymore. You don't have to be the only one who feels like this, and you don't have to tackle it by yourself. So let's start with a question. When you think about what usually motivates you, what comes to mind? I'll tell you what probably doesn't come to mind, but is actually most people's honest answer. Fear. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of failure. Fear of falling behind. Or even guilt. The nagging voice that says, you should be doing more. And sure, fear and guilt can push you into action. They can push you to meet a deadline or clean up the house before the guests arrive, or pack right before your trip tomorrow. But here's the problem. Fear-based fuel will burn very quickly, and the cost is very high. It gives a short burst of energy, but leaves you exhausted and resentful. And you're more likely to crash afterwards. That's why so many of us live in these cycles of sprinting and collapsing. And that's that chaos that I'm talking about. They push themselves into fear until they just can't anymore. And then they collapse in exhaustion and avoidance, and then use guilt to force themselves up again, or even external deadlines and pressure again and again. That's what drive replaces. Drive is about building motivation that lasts. Motivation that comes from within, not from fear, not from external pressure, and not from shame. Motivation that feels steady and sustainable and connected to what really matters to you. So let's contrast this with why external fuel does the opposite. Imagine two students who both have a huge project due in 3 weeks. I'm sure we can all remember that time. Student A, whether they realize it or not, are fueled by fear. They think, if I don't get this done, I'll fail. I need to get started. My professor has so much faith in me and will be so disappointed. My parents told me to try really hard this semester and I just can't start. They procrastinate till the last minute and they pull an all-nighter in a panic. They turn it in on time, but they're exhausted and they promise themselves they'll do better next time. Now, student A is pretty smart, so even that last-minute project probably does pretty well, but it's not their potential. It's not what it looks like if they were able to fully commit themselves in confidence. Imagine what student A could do with that. Now, student B is fueled by something different. Whether they realize it or not, they're so connected to their work ethic and the things that they do that they know that this work supports what they want to do after graduation. Or even if this particular essay doesn't, the ability to plan and execute this essay supports the kind of person they want to be. They still feel resistance sometimes, as we all do. But they create a ritual each session of reminding themselves why it matters. And this ritual itself doesn't matter. The specific ritual doesn't. It's the pattern of knowing when you tend to struggle, when you tend to resist, and knowing how to treat it. So they chip away at it steadily, in incremental bits. When the deadline arrives, the project's done, and they don't feel destroyed. And most importantly, they gave it their all. That's the difference between extrinsic fuel and internal fuel. Extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. One burns you out, the other lights you up. Well, how do we build drive in real life? And it starts by learning about intrinsic motivation. There are 9 different types specifically, but I want to categorize those into different pillars. The first is values. So what matters to you at your core? Not what you should care about, what you actually care about. Like maybe you honor creativity and service and helping others. And when you connect those values to your tasks, they feel very meaningful and easy to pursue. Second is purpose. So the bigger picture. Purpose answers, how does this connect to something larger than myself? How does this contribute to the life I want and the person I want to be? And it doesn't have to be about grand missions or family legacies. It can be as simple as, this task helps me create a calmer home, which supports my mental health. There was a trend a while ago about the mental health walk, and how people were talking about how they dreaded getting a walk in every day, but they knew internally that it was so good for their mental health. Now, without the work of Prime, that knowledge alone is not enough to get you up and to go outside sometimes. But it's just an example of how other people have employed it and how it's shown up on social media. And third is resilience stories, like how you frame your past. Most of us are trained to look back on our failures as proof that we're broken. Do it well or don't bother doing it at all. But doing is how you learn. Drive teaches you to reframe them as proof of resilience. Actually, I procrastinated on every single assignment in high school and college. I have a horrible work ethic. I'm lazy. Instead of that, you say, I was aware of the struggle the whole time, and I kept pushing and I kept trying to be better, even if it wasn't realized yet. That shows that I care, that it wasn't malicious. When you draw from this different type of motivation, you build a kind of fuel that doesn't burn out after one task. It sustains you. So let's get deeper with some rituals. First, I know you've heard of it before, is the why ritual. You often hear this in lots of online weight loss communities. So before starting a task, you ask, why does this matter to me? Why am I doing this? Because honestly, you may realize, actually, this doesn't need to get done and I don't want to do it. You can write it down like I do in my journal, or you could say it out loud. And actually, saying it out loud has a lot of evidence behind why it helps you act more. I haven't looked into it very much, but I've seen a lot of people talk about it, of how actually speaking that desire to do something and why you want to do it into existence, actually saying it out loud, helps you get started a lot more. And I think it breaks that internal monologue of struggle. Either way, however you do it, it grounds you in meaning before you act and helps recenter you and helps interrupt that shame spiral if it's present. And second is energy matching. Stop expecting yourself to perform at 100% every single day. Instead, match tasks to your energy. Tasks don't have to look the same every day. The way you clean the kitchen on 100% energy doesn't look the same on if you're cleaning the kitchen on 20%, but you're still cleaning the kitchen. You're still being consistent. Another example is splitting up the kinds of things you do depending on how you're feeling. So high energy days would be those complex projects that take a lot of insight, a lot of planning, and then a lot of action afterward. Because planning takes up a lot of energy too. And then low energy days, you would do the smaller maintenance tasks that are kind of routine. You don't have to think about them as much. And this does build consistency and reliability that you know that even if you're not feeling well, you can trust yourself to do what needs to be done. And then 3, which is familiar with what I said about the intrinsic motivation, is to reframe your past struggles. Write a list of situations that you've shut down in the past. And I know it might be hard to think about them, but the more you ignore them and the more you push them away, the more power they're going to hold over you. So next to each of them, write, what was my brain trying to protect me from? This helps you see your history as resilience and, again, data, neutral data to use throughout this growth process, not as weaknesses. And again, before we go on, I want to remind you that what you need isn't more discipline. I know it sounds great and looks great on paper, but it doesn't address the pain that's causing this behavior in the first place. You need a system that makes you feel safe, that makes your motivation feel real and accessible, and your clarity feel actionable. Not every time you have some kind of planning breakthrough, you just let the energy dissipate because you don't know what to do with it and you don't trust yourself to do anything with it. So if that resonates, let's talk. These are free calls for you to map your stuck points, to diagnose what's really going on beneath the surface from someone who understands a second objective point of view, and to see if the process I built is your missing piece, and if not, what it is you need. You can book your call at the link below. Now let's move on to the third stage, clarity. If prime is the solid ground and drive is the fuel, then clarity is the steering wheel. It's what turns, literally, awareness into practical movement. And most people, myself included, tend to get stuck here. They have insight. They're incredibly self-aware. They know what they're doing, and they know that they procrastinate. They know they avoid. They know they shame themselves. They know when they're getting into these patterns again and again. But they don't know how to move forward in the moment. That's what clarity solves. Think of it like this. Imagine that your car dashboard lights up with warnings. I know mine has the air pressure on right now. It says low fuel, tire pressure, check your engine, check your coolant, all of that. And insight is knowing that the lights are on. You see them. You're not ignoring them. You're not oblivious. But without clarity, you don't know what to do about it. You don't know that you're supposed to drive to the mechanic, or even if you did, you have no idea where the mechanic is or what you're supposed to ask them. You just keep driving and hope it sorts itself out. That's what it's like to have that self-awareness without clarity. You see the patterns, but you don't know the cause. And even if you did, you don't know what to do about it. And when you don't know the cause, you don't know how to find the right solution. In clarity, we diagnose that resistance, and you're taught to do it yourself, not to rely on some kind of concrete tips and tricks manual. But for the rest of your life, no matter how this continues to show up in different seasons, to learn how to self-prescribe what you need. But they can pretty much be organized into 4 different causes: fear, fatigue, friction, and fog. In brief, fear means that you're scared of failure, judgment, or imperfection. The task feels risky. Fatigue means you're too tired, physically, mentally, emotionally, whatever, to engage. Friction means the task has too many barriers and is way too overcomplicated. And fog is exactly what it sounds like. You can't see. You don't know where to start. The task is unclear or overwhelming. And each cause requires a different approach and a different set of symptoms to look out for. Fear needs compassion. Fatigue needs rest or pacing. Friction needs simplification. Fog needs breaking down into steps. Without clarity, if you have the strength to try to treat it, well, you're treating everything the same, with the same productivity tips, with the same just be disciplined, and you just push harder, and that's why you stay stuck. This is why we use the self-prescription framework, a framework for diagnosing yourself in real time. So here's how it works. First, pause and notice. When you feel stuck, pause and ask, what's really happening here? Then identify the cause based on all that you know about those different sources. Is it fear, fog, friction, fatigue, whatever? And then prescribe the tool. Once you know what's going on, you choose the right support. Some examples are fear are reframing the expectations. Fatigue is deciding what kind of rest or pacing you need. Do you need to go take a nap? Do you need to go step outside for a minute? What do you need? Friction means to simplify the task, to make it easier to go from wanting to act. And fog is writing down the first minimum viable action. This framework takes the guesswork out. It makes resistance less scary because you know how to respond. Now, at first, clarity does feel awkward. You have to stop and ask questions. It slows you down. But over time, it becomes second nature, as it has for me. You notice resistance and immediately diagnose, even if you're not ready to fully act on it yet. Oh, this is fear. I know what to do. Or, oh, this is fatigue. Okay, well, what does my body need right now? Imagine how empowering that is, that the next time you get caught in this cycle, you know what to do about it. Instead of drowning in resistance, you have a roadmap that you built for yourself. If prime is the steady ground, and drive is the fuel, and clarity is the steering wheel, then confidence is the car, the structure, whatever you want to call it. But this is where growth stops being a project, not because it was ever one in the first place, but because the way you're viewing it is shifting. No, now it's become a way of life. Most people think of confidence as a feeling. When I feel confident, I'll act. But real confidence is not a feeling. It's a relationship. It's the relationship you build with yourself when you prove again and again that you can show up consistently, not perfectly, not 100% every day, but however you're able to, every day, consistently. And it doesn't look like productivity every day. It looks like consistently being able to honor yourself. And if you're too drained, if you're too exhausted to move forward and the choice you make is to rest, that's consistency in honoring yourself and building that self-trust to know that you are always going to show up for yourself, no matter what. And here's the beautiful part. Once you've cycled through prime and drive and clarity, then confidence isn't this hyped up, out of this world thing you're searching for. It's steady. It's the baseline. Without confidence, you can learn all the tools, all the strategies, and all the insights and still fall back into old patterns the moment that the rug gets ripped out from under you, because life does that. Think about it. You've probably had breakthroughs before, even in your worst struggles. Maybe you read a book that shifted your perspective and finally gave you the energy to say, I'm ready. Or you had a really productive streak for a few weeks after a motivating talk. Maybe you felt unstoppable until a stressful week at work, or some kind of dip in energy, or a sudden crisis knocked you back into shutdown, and after it was done, you couldn't get back up. That's what happens when you don't have integration. Insights fade, habits collapse, and you regress. Confidence prevents that regression. It doesn't mean that you keep going through the hard times. There are times where you need to take a step back, let other things become the priority. And in worst case scenarios, there are times where you just have to survive. But after you come back, confidence turns all of that inner work into outer infrastructure. It creates systems and rhythms that hold you even when you're not ready to keep going. It makes sure that your growth isn't just something you felt once and then lost forever. It's something you live day in and day out. So let's break confidence into 4 pillars, different practices that help you embody that self-trust in everyday life. Now, too often, especially starting out, we design systems based on the idealized version of ourselves. The productive me, the motivated me, the Superman or Superwoman me. The best version of myself if I finally got it together. But that is a recipe for burnout because it's unrealistic. And I've always hated that word. Who's to say what's realistic or unrealistic for anyone compared to another person? If excellence is possible one day, why isn't it possible every single day? And what I didn't know is that that thinking was rooted in tying my worth to that excellence. Excellence doesn't look the same every day because you're human. You have mental and emotional and physical energies that fluctuate. You are constantly being influenced by your environment, your nurture, your nature. So that dream version of yourself, even if it could possibly exist, isn't actually what you want. What you want is to be able to build a version of you rooted in values that knows how to adapt based on different situations. And yeah, that's not going to look like what you wanted at first. But you come out of the other side deciding that you didn't want that after all. And that's why in confidence, you design systems that reflect your real capacity. So instead of a morning routine that requires 1 hour of journaling and meditation and working out, well, you have a version that can be condensed to 5 minutes on days where you're rushed or days where you really don't have the energy. Instead of an overstuffed calendar, you organize your day based on pillars, the non-negotiables, and know that they can shift based on spending time with people and messaging people and eating and doing chores, or even the weather if that impacts what you want to do that day. Instead of rigid deadlines for personal projects, you work based off of milestones. When your systems reflect capacity, you stop constantly betraying yourself. You stop setting yourself up for failure. And over time, that builds trust. A lot of people build habits that only work in small bursts. The habit is sustainable only as long as life is calm. But the moment things get busy or difficult or chaotic, the pillar collapses. The habit collapses. So we want to build habits that can scale. A daily writing habit that starts at one sentence. On good days, it grows into a full page, or you just let yourself go without a time limit. And on hard days, you go back to a sentence, or even a day where you don't do any at all, because you know that doesn't take away from all your growth. But it always exists, somehow. A movement habit might start as just a 5-minute walk or a quick stretch right before bed. On energized days, you extend it. On tired days, you do 30 seconds. These habits are elastic. They stretch with you instead of snapping under pressure. And I know you want to be the person who stretches every day, or the person who works out every day for an hour, non-negotiable. But listen, you're not doing any of it now. You're not where you want to be. And that's okay. But as soon as you actually accept that, then you can stop sticking your nose up at 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's still more than you're doing now. And I'm telling you why you haven't been able to do more than that until now. Now, pillar 3 is one of the biggest markers of confidence. Without this skill, every slip feels like proof that you're broken. You miss one workout and suddenly the streak is over. You procrastinate on one task and suddenly you're back to old patterns. And the shame spiral comes back in full force. But in confidence, you respond to that failure differently. Instead of collapsing, you reframe. You view it as data. This was feedback, not proof. This shows me what needs more support. For example, let's say you plan to spend an hour on a project today and you completely avoided it. Instead of spiraling into shame, you diagnose. Was it fear, friction, fatigue, fog? You learn. You adjust, and you try again tomorrow. Every time you do this, you teach yourself that setbacks are survivable and you can return. That's what builds trust. Finally, confidence is about shifting doing to being. Instead of chasing productivity, you live as someone who trusts themselves. Instead of proving, you embody. Your systems, your habits, your choices all become an expression of your identity. For example, instead of saying, I have to exercise every day, it's I'm someone who enjoys moving my body to take care of myself. Instead of saying I should stop procrastinating, you say I'm someone who experiments with micro-momentum. That shift from performance to identity, that's what creates the deepest level of confidence that can't be uprooted. Because now you're not acting out of that fear of failure or whatever it is for you. You're acting out of alignment for who you've become. And I want to share arguably the most important case study of my work of all, me. Because undergoing my own transformation, and the only reason I did, because I was stuck at rock bottom, nearly blowing up my whole life, well, it brought me to you. I was someone who had so much ambition, so many dreams. I knew I was capable of so much, but that's all they were. Dreams and ambitions, because every time I tried to get started, I sabotaged myself for the big stuff and for the small stuff, like how I wanted to clean my house, how I wanted to cook, how I wanted to take care of myself. All of it I sabotaged. Only the bare minimum got done, and sometimes not even that. And I tried every productivity system. Just like you, I have so many journals lying around. The pretty dashboards, the Pomodoro timers, the tips and tricks, and nothing stuck because I was never addressing what was going on underneath. I didn't have the words to describe it at the time, but slowly, through all of my dedicated research and interviews with other people actually, my own flywheel took shape. The foundation for this method took shape. When I worked through Prime, I learned to ground myself before my tasks. In Drive, I reconnected with the values of why I had those ambitions in the first place. And I realized not all of them actually mattered to me, I just thought they should have. In Clarity, I diagnosed what was wrong with me and started with minimum viable actions. But the real breakthrough came in confidence. I built a system of minimums and maximums, and this system reflects my capacity to this day and builds without burnout. And there are times where I need to step back. There are times when I need to rest, and this allows for it. After years of feeling like I was the problem, I realized I just didn't know how to treat what was wrong. And now I can trust myself to return. That's confidence. And now my clients go through the exact same flywheel. The one that took me years, a lifetime, to perfect without even knowing what was going wrong half the time. Without knowing that other people struggled with the same thing I did. I truly felt like some kind of anomaly. And now they get to go through it in as little as 6 months, but see changes immediately. And when you've been facing the same self-sabotage for a lifetime, that's nothing. Let's be honest. If willpower was enough, you wouldn't be stuck in the same cycles. If another planner, another hack, another tip was what you needed, you wouldn't be here right now. They haven't worked, and you know it. You're smart. You're self-aware. You've tried. You want to be better. You've had moments of progress. You've read all the books and watched all the YouTube videos. You've probably had weeks or maybe months where it all clicked into place. Or maybe it never has. And then something always derailed you and it all slipped away because it wasn't rooted in anything. Now you're back at square one. Not because you're broken, but because you were never taught that you have a legitimate struggle and you need a system that works with your brain. That's what this work is. We don't shame you into change. We don't throw one-size-fits-all advice at you, and we don't give you something that as soon as we take it away, you're left helpless. The goal is for you to be self-sustaining, self-optimizing, not in the toxic productivity culture way. I could talk about that for hours. I want to help you finally understand why these patterns exist and how to rewire them from the inside out. On a free discovery call, we take a look at your real life shutdowns and struggles, the cycles, the resistance, the moments that make you feel like nothing is ever good enough. Then we'll walk through the missing links, the emotional infrastructure, the prescription your nervous system needs to actually move forward, the self-prescription, so that no one can take it away from you. And if it looks like that process is the right fit, then we'll talk about what it would look like to work together. But even if we don't move forward, then you'll have clarity you've never had before, because you don't need another Band-Aid. You need a turning point. Click the link below to book your free discovery call. Let's make this the moment you finally stop trying to fix yourself and started building something that actually works. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown. And as always, stay in this corner of the internet as long as you need.